From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm public health reporter Drew Hawkins, chopping it up this week. Lawyers for Louisiana and Texas were back in court this week, trying to clear the way for new state laws requiring public schools to display the Ten Commandments. Here to tell us more about the legal battle is WWNO's education reporter Aubri Juhasz. Hey, Aubri.
Hey, Drew.
All right, so you were in court yesterday. Tell us what happened and where things stand right now.
Yeah, I'll take you back to the beginning. But what you need to know is, for now, the courts have effectively blocked both laws and another one in Arkansas. In Louisiana, a lower court sided with plaintiffs, several families of different faiths, the American Civil Liberties Union, and other groups back in 2024 when the law was first passed. Then a 3-judge panel on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld that decision last year. So Louisiana appealed to the full court. That's why we were back at the Fifth Circuit earlier this week, and Texas joined so that the judges could hear their arguments together. Outside of the court after Tuesday's hearing, Louisiana's Republican Attorney General Liz Murrill summarized the state's argument like this.
The point that we are trying to make is that this is a foundational document for our legal and our historical traditions in creating our government structures, creating our country.
Murrill argues the law isn't about the state endorsing religion, but schools teaching morals.
Okay, a lot of back and forth here, but I thought this was a settled legal issue, right? Like the First Amendment calls for strict separation of church and state, especially for things like public schools, right?
Exactly. Until a few years ago, yes. But in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court sided with a high school football coach who prayed on the field during and after games, sometimes with students. In that decision, the court threw out the legal standard it had used for nearly 4 decades to determine whether a law crossed the line between church and state. To pass that test, for one, the law had to have a clear secular purpose. Since then, Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas have passed laws requiring public schools to display the Ten Commandments, hoping the court will revisit this issue, rule in their favor, and open the door for other states to pass similar laws.
Somehow even more back and forth. So let's take a quick second. Let's take a step back. What does Louisiana's law say exactly?
Yeah. The law says the Ten Commandments must be displayed in every public school classroom, including colleges and universities. So if you're attending public school starting in, preschool, pre-K, that means you would see this text every hour of every day for your entire educational career. The commandments, a specific version of them, need to be displayed in large, easily readable font, and the posters have to include a context statement. It's several paragraphs, but in short, it says that the Ten Commandments were a prominent part of American public education for almost 3 centuries, though some historians argue that isn't true. And the inclusion of that statement is really key to the state's legal argument, because they're using it to claim that the posters aren't religious displays, but teaching tools.
All right, so that's the state's argument. What are the plaintiffs arguing? What are they saying to push against the law?
Yeah, that the state can't require schools to display a single religious document, in this case a specific version of the Ten Commandments, without it being interpreted as the state endorsing a specific religion. Plaintiff's attorney Jonathan Youngwood told the full Fifth Circuit this week that Louisiana's law makes the text ubiquitous in schools.
Every class, every day, the message received and the coercion experienced as our parents testified unrebutted on their children is to be presented with this state-sponsored scripture that commands them to believe, just to take the beginning, I am the Lord thy God.
Okay, so really appreciate the update of where we are now, but what happens next, Aubri?
Yeah, so the full Fifth Circuit needs to issue its decision. It's considered by many to be the most conservative appeals court in the country. And based on the questions some of the judges asked, some will likely side with the state, though we don't know how many of the 18 judges who heard the case. From there, the losing party will likely appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, which legal scholars expect would take up this case.
I am curious, too, because I know the law is blocked. But have you seen any of these posters? What do they look like?
Yeah. So I haven't seen them in person, but I've seen mock pictures, like designs, and then I've seen, pictures of printed posters. So just to get into this a little bit, the state's attorney general office, as part of their, argument that these are legal, they went ahead and they designed them. schools don't have to use this exact version, but they have options to pick from. And then the Louisiana Family Forum, a conservative Christian group that helped write the law, they went ahead and fundraised, I think, $40,000, and they printed a bunch of these state-designed posters and then sent them to all of the schools, most of the schools in the state, except for the ones that are explicitly named in this lawsuit. So most schools should have boxes of these posters. We haven't seen any evidence of school leaders hanging them up, because even if they haven't been explicitly barred from doing so, it's expected that they would get, roped into the lawsuit the second they slap one of those up on the wall.
All right, I guess we will see what happens next. Aubri Juhasz is the education reporter with WWNO in New Orleans. Thanks again for talking with us.
You're welcome.
So there's been a lot going on in the U.S., and that includes stepped-up immigration enforcement and the National Guard being deployed to cities like ours in New Orleans. But those things don't happen in a vacuum, and they can have ripple effects on parts of the economy you might not expect, like tourism. Joining me now to talk about that and what it might mean for New Orleans Mardi Gras is Gulf States Newsroom senior reporter Kat Stromquist. Hey, Kat.
Hey, Drew.
All right, so tell me, what is happening in the tourism sector right now?
Well, it's kind of a big question, but one of the trends at the moment is reduced international travel to the U.S. specifically. One expert told me that international tourism to the U.S. is down by somewhere between 2 and 8%. And some analysts think that's because of this, xenophobic rhetoric from, political officials and this focus on immigration enforcement. So, as you and I both know, because we live here, Drew, anything that impacts tourism matters a lot in New Orleans, where our economy is very much intertwined with that industry. I recently talked to a few people working around Jackson Square, where artists, fortune tellers, and street performers tend to congregate, to kind of take the temperature on this. This is Freddie Zalagi, who I met selling folk art behind the cathedral.
The whole climate in general is making a difference, whether people travel at all. I would say that when talking to other people and artists, we're seeing a lot less international travelers.
I think concern about these impacts is pretty widespread. Last month, amid the beginning of the so-called Catahoula Crunch immigration operation, hundreds of members of New Orleans' cultural community signed an open letter speaking out against those activities, pointing to a potential chilling effect on the city's tourism economy.
Yeah, and we're also entering into one of our busiest tourist times of the year. So how does Carnival fit into all of this?
Yeah, Carnival is actually a really big business for New Orleans. One study from 2023 found that it accounts for just over 3% of our gross domestic product, generating $891 million in direct and indirect revenue. I asked the expert I mentioned earlier if she thinks this year's Carnival turnout might be affected by this political climate and changes to travel patterns. This is Bridget Bordelon. She's an endowed chair at the School of Hotel, Restaurant, and Tourism Administration at the University of New Orleans.
Even a modest decline in global tourism can weigh heavily on a big event, especially one that really benefits the hospitality and tourism industry.
She drew parallels with what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic and, more recently, after the New Year's terrorist attack on Bourbon Street. Basically what she's saying, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, is that tourism is a bit sensitive to these things.
So we know that when something is happening, potentially with an idea of fear or protection, political instability, or even policy decisions, that has a big impact on visitation.
And it's not just international visits. She said domestic travel could be impacted by what's happening too. She says domestic travelers may have read news reports about December's wave of immigration agents in the city and may second-guess New Orleans as a destination. So all that could very well affect this Mardi Gras.
Yeah, I see how that could, put a damper on celebratory atmosphere. How will we get a sense after Mardi Gras of what the impact actually ended up being, what it was?
So there are a couple different indicators to look at, things like inbound flights and hotel occupancy. And Bordelon says it takes a couple of months after Mardi Gras for that data to kind of coalesce. I actually tried to learn a bit about projections on hotel occupancy for this year, just to get a sense of where things stand so far, and haven't been able to figure it out. I reached out to New Orleans & Company, the Greater New Orleans Hotel and Lodging Association, 3 different hotel groups, and the City of New Orleans, and haven't heard back from any of them yet. So I don't have that estimate. But these numbers are a big deal for the city. Remember that 3% of GDP. So I'm sure we'll hear more about this after the fact.
Okay, another piece of this that I'm sort of wondering about is public safety. Do you know anything about whether the police are planning for any changes to Mardi Gras attendance?
Sure. I reached out to the New Orleans Police Department about this, and they told me they don't track expected attendance or hotel occupancy to determine their staffing. Instead, they look at things like parade routes and road closures and then can scale up or down as things change. But one other piece of this I'm real curious about is the interaction of all these law enforcement agencies during the big event. Given some of the footage we're seeing from Minnesota, I could imagine a situation where if, say, immigration officials try to make an arrest on or near a parade route, things could really escalate. NOPD didn't directly answer a question I asked about whether their chief has been in conversation with ICE or CBP about their planned activities during the main dates of Carnival, instead referring me to those agencies. The city also hasn't answered a question about that yet. But NOPD did remind me they're known for their handling of large-scale events like Mardi Gras, and they've trained other agencies to manage those events, too.
Well, I guess you could say, and I'm so sorry for this, we'll just have to see how the good times roll. Thanks.
Har.
Thanks as always for talking with me, Kat.
Thank you.
And now it's time for Gulf States Gems, where we shine a light on the treasures of our region. And we're bringing back Kat Stromquist for this segment, who is sadly making her last appearance as a reporter for the Gulf States newsroom.
That's right, Drew. I'm so sad to be leaving.
Okay, so as you're heading out, first of all, you're our gem for this week. But I do want to know, what are some gems that maybe stand out to you from your time here?
Okay, maybe this will sound silly, but I think my gem is the Greater South. I moved to the South more than 20 years ago, but I've been to so many places for this job I'd never been to before, from Shreveport to Montgomery to Birmingham, or the very first place I went for this job, the little town of Lexington, Mississippi, to look into a story about alleged police misconduct there. It's really made me feel connected to the history and, to be frank, the struggle of this place, and has really affirmed my choice to build a life here. This is the story that I want to be part of.
I am happy to know at least that you will be staying here, and so you're not actually leaving, although you won't be with us here at the Gulf States newsroom anymore, and we will miss you very dearly.
Thanks, Drew. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you too.
Definitely, especially for Mardi Gras. And for listeners, we'd still love to hear your gems, including your favorite places outdoors, which is something we're sort of building a collection of. So please send us an email to connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feeds every Friday. Look us up and be sure to subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Drew Hawkins. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your roux.